They say to be a Jedi that you have to construct your own lightsaber. I'm pretty proud of how this one turned out. But the thing is, with projects like this, every time I watch the videos of them, they're always like, oh, I got the parts and then wham, bam, put it together, wrote some custom code and boom, I got the project. But oh, it was so not like this making this project. Had I known what it would entail to make this, I'm not sure I would have gone on this adventure. This 6-fingered lightsaber project actually started out as a 10-day engineering build project. And I thought, sure, I could do this in 10 days. I've already built one lightsaber before. Sure, this lightsaber is basically just a soldering job with a bunch of LEDs in it that I just kind of banged together and then 3D printed a casing for it. This is actually a really fun and simple way to learn soldering. It's a great project for beginners. And I thought this time I was going to use these individually addressable LEDs. Oh, you know, these are one of the most amazing innovations that the electronics revolution has created. I mean, just think about what goes into each one of these. All you need is power, ground, and one line of data going in, which means every single one of these receives the data for all of them all the way down the line. It takes out the part that it needs and passes it on. There's a timing chip in here. There's logic circuits. These things are absolutely amazing, and you can buy a whole spool of 300 of them for 30 bucks. We are totally living in the future. But most of the time when I see these being used, they're kind of underutilized. People throw up a light of these and then just turn them all on to bright white and just use them to illuminate a scene. Like, okay, yeah, you can do that, but if you're just going to make them all be the same thing, just wire up some LEDs in parallel with each other. Why use something as intensive as this? And so I wanted for my project something that could utilize the full range of what these LEDs can do. So not only could you change the color of the blade to match what side of the force you want to be on, but we could also have modes that are colorful and moving and changing all the time. So that was the idea going into here. An LED lightsaber that would, of course, be powered on its own, but have an input device, in this case, a little potentiometer, that would read the position of that potentiometer and respond by coming up with different modes that you can switch between just for fun, some of which could even be animated. Christmas, anybody? But one last detail that I had to figure out before I could get started was, what shape would the hilt be? I knew it was going to be a lightsaber, but I didn't want it to be just like any old Star Wars lightsaber. When I did my mini lightsaber, I made the handle look like a sonic screwdriver, and I wanted to do something a little bit like that with this one. Now, the thing about brainstorming is it's always best to do it with as many brains as possible. So talk to other people about your project and maybe they'll come up with a great idea. And sure enough, my wife, when I expressed my idea of what I wanted to do in this project, she started thinking about cool swords and said, could you do the sword from Princess Bride? Oh, yes, that's the winner. So next came the experimentation phase and playing with what I had to see if I could get it to do what I wanted it to. I needed to take these LEDs and hook them up and see what I could do. And my original idea was to take the 50 LEDs that this was going to be long, fold it over and bring it back on itself. So in code, I needed to duplicate whatever I was doing with this blade on one side with the other side. And later on, I realized I could just take the two stripes of LEDs and wire them up in parallel. They'd get the same data and I would get both sides for free and wouldn't need any fancy code. Another thing I learned during this time is that if you try to light up more than about 20 of these LEDs off of the 5 volts that come off of your Arduino, that you run out of power and the Arduino starts stuttering and stopping and not working. So I needed an external power supply for it. And at first I used my standard standby external power source of 9-volt batteries. And after running through 4 of those in a day of trying to program these blades, I thought 9-volt batteries ain't gonna cut it. Unfortunately, I didn't have on hand the batteries that I needed, and I thought I was going to have to order them. And so my 10-day project was suddenly looking like I wasn't going to finish it in 10 days. Fortunately, I have a local battery shop, and when I went there and said, hey, do you got these rechargeable batteries that everybody's talking about? They said, yes, kind of. We have this different kind that actually has a USB port on it so that you can charge it without needing an external charger. And I went, sold. So I had the batteries, I had the Arduino, I had the start of the code that I was going to use, and it was responding to the twist of the potentiometer. So it was looking good. So now I needed to start modeling something that would hold all of these together in place. Now, this goes out to everybody who thinks that Blender can't be used to do real-life projects. I was completely capable of modeling this in Blender. I just made 3D representations to the exact dimensions of the components that I was building. I built a handle around them that would hold them all into place. And I even 3D printed the threads on it so that we could take our handles and screw it on there when we're done and hold it in place. But then I ran into my next hurdle, because once I had the electronics together and the LED strip ready to go, I put my LED strip into the acrylic tube that I had and discovered that that acrylic tube was too small. Oh no. Oh no. Some idiot didn't pay attention to the fact that 3/8 of an inch is smaller than 10 millimeters. Of course, this is the week leading up to Christmas, and during December, I try not to order things online, which means I was going to have to wait till January to get the part that I needed, which means my 10-day build was not going to be finished in 10 days. I had proved the concept. I had the basic code in place and I was ready to go, but unfortunately I was going to have to wait to get the delivery so that I could get this going the way that I wanted to. And then there was the problem of the fact that the acrylic tube that I got was transparent. I needed something that would diffuse the light a little bit, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was experimenting with the too small tube that I had and seeing if I could just get some sandpaper and buff it up that way, and that worked, but it was going to take a lot of time. Man, it sure would be nice if I had a sandblaster. So I asked around, and I found that I had a friend nearby who had a sandblaster and was able to do this, but you know, I wanted to make this fancy. So I took electrical tape and masked off the blade so that when he sandblasted it, there would be a pattern in the blade. And in the end, it turned out really cool after he sandblasted it, although, you know, the lights, the individual LEDs are still visible through it, and really, I wish that I had something that was more diffuse. This will work for now. Obviously, it's what I've got, but already I'm thinking about, man, if I did this again, I would do a little bit differently. And then there was the 3D modeling of the handle. Like I said, I made it so that it would screw on. Technically, I could, I suppose, put any handle that I wanted on this, but I wanted this to look like the 6-fingered blade from The Princess Bride. And fortunately, there's a lot of reference images online of, if not the original, very close reproductions. And at first, I tried very, very hard to replicate the exact filigree of that design in this one. And it was just frustrating. It was hard to see in a lot of pictures the exact design of the filigree. And then I saw a reproduction that somebody had done that looked nothing like any of those reproductions. It was for a stage play, and yet it kind of had the spirit of it. And that gave me the leave to just make this however I wanted. And so I did, and I put some more Easter eggs in here, just kind of for myself. If you ever get a chance to look at this close up, maybe you'll be able to find some of them. I modeled this in Blender as well, and I used some, if I can say myself, some very clever techniques. The guard itself is just modeled very roughly, and then I use modifiers to smooth it out and make it look the right way. And then I used more modifiers to give it extra geometry so that I could displace it according to an image that I had made that I had mapped on the outside of here. I gotta say, I'm kind of proud of how well this turned out. But what would be the best way to 3D print it? At first I thought, I could split it in half, lay it down. It would be a fairly short print. I would just have to put supports underneath all of these parts. But these parts were never meant to be seen. They're always supposed to be away from the viewer. So no big deal, except that we had on this side over here supports above and below, and in the removing of those supports, it broke. So this became another test piece for me to play with. And in the end, I decided as long as these balls were touching the build plate and I was careful about making them adhere well, that I could just print this standing up. Sure, there'd be a little bit of overhang here to deal with and supports underneath there, but for the most part, this would probably print pretty well standing up. Now, this was a print that I was going to test out the longer LK5 on, and the first print didn't exactly succeed, but I blame the fact that the balls on the end just weren't very stuck to the build plate, and so I ran another one with more bed adhesion, and that one worked good, but it was a 3-day print, a nerve-wracking 3-day print that the whole time I was watching this 3D printer, could the longer LK5 pull it off? Every day I'd come in and look, and every day it was just chugging along layer by layer until at the end of 3.5 days of printing, it succeeded. Now, talking about the longer LK5, it is a affordable, large format 3D printer without a whole lot of bells and whistles. Although one of the coolest things about it, the user interface is, well, it's kind of familiar. It looks a lot like the user interface on a Raise 3D printer. However, it's not the user interface on a Raise. The Raise 3D printer's user interface runs on Windows. This definitely does not, but they were definitely cribbing notes from the Raise 3D printer, and for whatever reason, them looking at a superior user interface and going, I want to copy what it does, created a pretty decent user interface on the longer LK5 Pro. However, whenever you have a 3D printer of this price, there's going to be a lot of things about it that you're not gonna like as well. And for sure, there's a lot of things about this 3D printer that I wish were better. This build plate, I couldn't get anything to stick to it until I absolutely doused it with hairspray. Also, the SD card is kind of hiding away in the back under the filament in the shadows. It's really hard to get at, and I was able to get an extension and move that out so that I could access the SD card in front. That helped a lot. In fact, overall, I would say any major problem that you have with this 3D printer can be upgraded away, but it's kind of frustrating that those upgrades are necessary in the first place. Still, I can't deny that, especially on this project where every part that was 3D printed was 3D printed on the LK5 Pro, it succeeded brilliantly. It did a great job. I used a variety of materials in this project. The electronics holder together thing was printed in PETG. The main part of the handle was printed in silk PLA, and the guard was printed in Polyterra white PLA or black PLA when I was experimenting with it. And I gotta say, I really do like this Polyterra stuff. It comes on a cardboard roll, which just makes me feel good, and it's good filament. It prints well. Normally, I don't recommend being loyal to one brand of PLA. One brand of PLA is the same as another, but if you're gonna be loyal to a brand, I'm really thinking Polymaker is the one to go for, because they make good stuff and they're just conscientious. I like it. So finally, I've got the right tube. I've got all the parts printed. I've got the code written for it, and I'm ready to put it all together. I 3D printed an end cap that has just a little bit of a peg on it that I could wrap the LEDs around with some fishing wire so that it won't fall down as I'm swinging it around and doing cool stuff with it. Put it all together, turned it on for the first time, and doggone it, it worked, and it is so cool. Now, I discovered early on that I needed to have a stand for it because as cool looking as this handle is, it is a little bit fragile, and I've already had to super glue it like 3 times. Another couple of finishing touches though, and things that I had to experiment with, I had heard that if you use shoe polish on gold paint like this, that it makes it look weathered and old, and I could see that. A sword like this that you have for years, you try to clean it and keep it good, but you just can't get into those deep crevices, and also it just makes the pattern on here pop. Well, so which shoe polish to use? I mean, black is the common, but they also make brown shoe polish. Well, I got them both, and I used one of the extra 3D prints that I experimented with. I actually used a lot of failed prints for experiments to try different finishes, to try and see what I needed to do. I found a little bit of clear coat, made the lines a little bit gone, and made things a little bit smoother, and then putting the gold on top of it worked. But now for the shoe polish, should I do black? Should I do brown? Tried them both out on here, and sure enough, my instinct was right. Brown was the right choice, and so I did that on the final one, and ooh, just made everything pop. And then there was the gemstones, and I considered for these gemstones to 3D print them. I thought, well, I could color some clear resin and 3D print them in there, but they were small, and you know, I could just run down to the hobby store and get some colored rhinestones, which is what I did in the end. It was a quick and simple fix, but you know what? It looks good, and it really just makes it all pop in the end. And there it is, the 6-fingered lightsaber is complete. Until I figure out a way to maybe get a better diffuser and maybe find somebody with a large format resin 3D printer who'd be willing to 3D print this guard in more detail. Maybe add an accelerometer to the electronics so it'll respond to motion, and a speaker too. Okay, I'm already thinking of maybe a version 2 of this, but this one itself is already pretty impressive, and I'm probably going to be enjoying it for a long time. And you'll be seeing it in the background of my videos, just back there doing cool things and putting on a little light show for you guys so that you guys can just have something to look at instead of, well, you know. I want to talk about the code that I used to run this lightsaber. There are already people out there who are making lightsabers, but I wanted something, like I said, that was responsive, that I could change and go from different modes and do different things with the different modes. And near as I could tell, that code didn't exist. But the problem is, if I were to show you guys the code, if I were to put the code up on screen, everybody would click away from this video. It's like code is too scary for people, that they just can't endure even looking at it. And yet what's funny is a lot of people, when they find out that I wrote code, are like, oh, I wish I could write code. Well, then don't be scared of it. Look at it, check it out, and then dive into code, because that's the only way you're not going to be scared of it. This, for as fun and robust as it is, really isn't that complicated. Code's not impossible to understand, and it's not impossible to learn. I discovered while I was waiting for parts to come in and had nothing better to do but to play with the code, that there is a website out there called Walkwe. It has a simulated Arduino environment that you can simulate multiple LEDs, addressable LEDs on there. So I set up an environment that is a potentiometer, a Arduino, and 50 LEDs. And if you want to jump on there and write a function that will do cool things with 50 LEDs, I will take that function, I will add it to the code for this lightsaber, and maybe in the future we'll have a video where I run your code on my lightsaber. I think that there's still a lot that could be done with this straight line of 50 LEDs, and if you have any idea and you want to see it on my lightsaber, well, jump on to the link in the description. I'll also have a link in the comment section that will go back to my blog with more information. And I would love to see what you guys come up with, because I know that you are bright and clever, and I know that you guys can come up with some really, really cool things that I can't wait to see on this blade. For some reason, I was having a huge challenge in this video, because whenever I have a bright light source in the middle of my view, like, my camera responds by just darkening it. Do you see that? It's like magic. Knocks. What's going on with my camera? While you're checking out this cool thing posted by one of you on the What You Making channel on my Discord, why don't you open up the cards and see what deep dive into the topics of this video you can do. And this is really cool. Yeah, I really enjoy it when people connect with me on social media. That's why I've got links to all the socials in the description, and I hope you'll check them out. I've also got a Patreon, which you can check out here, and I'll tell you a little secret about the suggested videos. This is the one that YouTube thinks that you'll like. This is the one, though, that I think you'll like. Which one of us is right? Only one way to know for sure. Gotta watch them both. And remember, safety first, because I really do care about you, and see you next time.